Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to another episode of The Ways We Move, the podcast that highlights innovative mobility solutions and the people who are behind those solutions. And today I have, can you guess, another great, important guest who will be telling us a little bit about what's going on in advanced air mobility, specifically in the state of Washington in the United States. Can you guess who that is? That is David Ison. So David, I've been following David for many years, especially when I was at the Vertical Flight Society working there for as business development. And David always struck me as someone who is no nonsense, straight to the point, everything but, the marketing fluff part of advanced air mobility. And I've always liked his views on advanced air mobility. He's a great researcher. He knows what he's doing. He knows what he's talking about. And so it was a pleasure talking to him. And we're going to talk a little bit about, what's been happening in advanced air mobility, where we are. Basically, we're trying to get to how real is advanced air mobility, and of course, just between you and me, it's real, it's happening. And we're going to talk about what's happening in the state of Washington. So David works for the DOT in Washington, and we started to talk a little bit about all those different islands they have out there. And of course, electric ferries are a wonderful way to connect all of these communities that are spread out, but so are seaplane and sea gliders. So stay tuned. Please like, share, and also comment. Let us know what you think. Let us know what you know, and let us know if these podcasts help you to better understand what these innovative mobility solutions are and what it means for you and your future. And of course, go and check out our website. We have a website. It's called electricairmobility.news, where you can read a lot more articles. And I usually post what we do here so that you can review it and have a little bit more of a background story around it. In the meantime, if you are somebody who works in advanced air mobility or in the electric vehicle industry or rail or maritime, we would love to hear from you. The original idea of the ways we move is to talk about all of these other industries, not necessarily the one I'm in, which is advanced air mobility. I'm a rail fanatic. I love cars, obviously, like most other people. And hey, you know what? We're restoring a boat, so I very attuned to the maritime world. So anyway, without further ado, let's hear what David has to say about advanced air mobility. All right. Well, David, thank you for being with us. Thank you for being on the Ways We Move. Please introduce yourself. Who is David, and where does David come from?
Sure. Well, I have many years of experience in aviation. I started out attending a flight program to become a pilot many years ago, and I was very lucky to get to work as an airline pilot for about 10 years. One company was Delta Connection, the other was an airline that unfortunately is not in business anymore, ATA Airlines. So was able to
Wow,
do
yeah.
regional flying as well as international flying. And unfortunately, 9/11 put a damper on the job market at the time. And so I jumped over to teaching aviation in college. So I worked at a small liberal arts college in Montana for a while, and then worked with Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University for about 7 years. And then started teaching PhD students at another university, and decided I think I'm done teaching for at least a while, and got into government as an aviation planner, where I've been at Washington State Department of Transportation now for a couple of years.
That's right. Yeah. So you flew with ATA. I remember the company pretty well. What kind of aircrafts were you flying with?
So I initially was on the 11, and so that was primarily military charter. So yeah, we went pretty much anywhere where the U.S. had troops at the time, and then
Yeah.
they kind of switched gears more towards a scheduled airline, and I think that's kind of what did them in, actually. But I was on the 737, based out of Chicago Midway.
And then I guess one of the things we should probably just go with is to get your point of view when it comes to advanced air mobility, and also for people who might not know who you are. Yes, they can exist. David is a wealth of information, but also the thing that I really have enjoyed about your articles is your overview of the situation, and you can also dive deep down into pretty much any silos in this situation. So in this industry. So tell us a little bit about how do you see advanced air mobility? We've certainly have more from a pretty quaint idea, notion, to something that today looks a little bit more fleshed out. What's your point of view from your angle?
Sure. So initially, it did seem to be a little more on the science fiction side of things than the reality. But we're starting to see a movement in the industry, and things are definitely starting to solidify. You are starting to see some clear industry leaders. You've got the Joby and Archer that are looking pretty good in terms of getting their aircraft to market and actually operating them. And then there are more companies that are lesser known that are starting to get a little better positions as well. You're still seeing ample funding, at least for the big companies. Joby and Archer just recently secured large additional rounds of funding, so they seem to be set to get to market. And then the other interesting thing is the advanced air mobility market really kind of focused on the United States initially, but we're starting to see that that's not where we're going to see the earliest activity. And so, in fact, the US, I hope, doesn't get left behind, but we're in a situation where we need to be real careful that we don't slip too much further. And I think the executive orders that just came out certainly may help that situation. But the early entrance for this marketplace seems to be the Middle East, which was kind of, I guess, shouldn't be surprising with the amount of investment capital that's available there. But I don't think a lot of people saw that at first, that was going to be the launch market for a lot of this.
Yeah, and you're right. Historically, the Middle East has, sometimes taken on big projects that didn't always materialize. But one thing that was really interesting a few years ago, I was talking to the GCAA in the Emirates, and they described their philosophy, how they were looking at advanced air mobility, and they said, we're really looking at what the FAA is doing and what EASA is doing, and within those two big circles, we're right in the middle. So we're focusing on that specifically. And then they, point blank, I mean, you can fly up to 500 feet over there, and that's your own, there's no problem. But everything after that is a single military airspace. So it makes it way easier for these guys to get going. And we've seen what Abu Dhabi has done. We've seen what Dubai has done. Even in Ras Al Khaimah, there's, the biggest casinos being built out there right now. There's definitely all the right, short of all the right financial resources, but there's also the right kind of mentality. There's the right, we want to do it. And, yeah, I think it most likely will be Dubai and Abu Dhabi that will probably have the very first operations. Another thing you highlighted too, and I want to also go back to that. You're right. In the United States, it's really strange because I think if last time I checked, we have about 97% of all the IPs are here when it comes to AAM, specifically eVTOLs, right? And strangely enough, we don't really have any infrastructure companies, right? They're all European. So European on the other side have the infrastructure side of things. And this is something that always, I lost hair, by the way, when I used to have hair when I started in this industry a long time ago. But the introduction of EVs was always the same thing. Guys, we're focusing too much on the cars, not enough on the infrastructure. And I wanted to make sure that we don't do that over here. So what's your view on all of this? Because it seems like it's all spread out. Here in the US, we build the eVTOLs. In Europe, they're taking care of infrastructure and operations and governing regulatory bodies. The Emirates are doing a pretty good job. And we're going to leave China apart because that's an island unto itself.
True. And to some extent, the Middle East is unique as well, because there is definitely, there's not as much congestion in terms of airspace, as much air traffic. There's hardly any general aviation in any of the Middle Eastern countries. So, you can be hyper focused on what I would call a kind of premium transportation network. So there's some unique positioning that the Middle Eastern countries have. And along with that is, with the capital that's available, putting in infrastructure is not as big of an obstacle. And also the numbers of
Oops. I don't know if my internet is going down or your internet is going down. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what you call a technical hiccup difficulties. I'm gonna pause.
the Middle East, infrastructure wise, they don't need the numbers of vertiports. And also they have, again, they have the financial resources to, if you have to build a handful of vertiports, not quite as big of a challenge. When you're talking about the scale that would be required to really set up a decent network in the United States or even Europe, you're talking about a significant amount of infrastructure.
Yes.
And the question is, who's going to pay for it, right? Because even a cheap vertiport is going to cost a pretty penny. And in addition to potentially having to put in the charging infrastructure and some other aspects, firefighting capabilities, whatever, you're starting to really rack up a sum that when you start calculating out how many of these spots you're going to need to have a real useful network, it's very difficult to figure out how that's going to work.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point because when you really think about it, you can start from Qatar, Bahrain, you can go to Abu Dhabi, you can go to Dubai and Ras Al Khaimah, you can even prolong it to Oman. Those are not too far away from one another, and most eVTOLs could actually fly there and everything. When it comes to energy, there's plenty of sun, plenty of ways to use alternative energy to make anything. Hydrogen can be cracked not too far away, and it doesn't need to be transported very far. It wouldn't lose too much of its energy. So you're right, it is a good idea. But over here, when I hear companies saying they're going to be flying out of New York, LAX, Dallas, I'm thinking, oh, okay, now how is that going to work exactly? And the insurance part of it, which by the way, you wrote an excellent article on that part alone just scares me. And the real estate price of developing vertiports, that also is something else that needs to be taken into account. One thing that we always hear about is for some reason we keep on hearing about eVTOLs, but we don't really hear all that much about eSTOLs and eCTOLs. What's your take on all that? I mean, all eyes are on eVTOLs and we hear about certification. When you read the fine line, there's a difference between prototype certification and actual commercial operational certification. What's your take on all of this?
Well, I think a really smart solution was along the lines of what Beta's
Yeah.
doing, where they essentially have a conventional takeoff and landing version of what is, minus the vertical capacity is the same aircraft. So, let's certify pretty much everything except for that actual capability, and then that leap will be a lot easier to do. So I think that was a brilliant strategy. And one thing that we really, I think, have kind of lost is the retrofitting of existing aircraft with new types of propulsion as a means of jumping into a whole new world of regional air mobility.
Yes.
I guess if you're doing the short takeoff and landing capability, it could be urban air mobility as well. But you can take a certified aircraft and swap out the propulsion and get that signed off a heck of a lot faster than you can a green sheet aircraft. So I think we've focused too much on the completely brand new aircraft, and not done our due diligence in other areas.
Yeah, it's interesting because if you think about it, aviation, aerospace in general is very conservative, moves very slowly, safety above all that good stuff. And if you look at what happened with EVs, is we really went for hybrids first, and then plug-in hybrids, and then finally people said, well, I can get by with an EV. And it was this progressive, and fleet owners that really helped us understand, 40 miles a day, 60 miles a day, this is what we need. And I think it was in 2019, I was living in California, so I went to see our friends at Ampere. And I thought, wow, this is brilliant what they're doing. It makes absolute sense. A four-seater, just, put a battery pack in it, and there you go. You have a hybrid system. You can retrofit it. You can work your way up to a 19-seater, so on and so forth. And you're right, I'm not seeing too much of that. In fact, as much as I love what Electra is doing with their eSTOL. I mean, it's brilliant, taking off on less than 150 feet and landing on even less than that. So that's pretty amazing. In Cedar, I guess we'll have to stretch that out a bit more, maybe to 200 or 300 feet. But there's still a really good opportunity to work on these 4 and 6 and 9 seaters that can definitely do with a hybrid system.
Yeah, I think the hybrid is, there's only so much you can do with a pure electric aircraft. I mean, the question that I often get is, when are we going to see commercial size aircraft that are all electric? And the answer is you're not going to, because you're never going to see a transcontinental all electric aircraft. I mean, unless we create some sort of technology that I have no idea
Yeah.
how they're going to come up with that. But hybrid, sure. I mean, hybrid opens up a whole nother option in terms of capacity for route, distances, use cases. It just gives you the flexibility. The battery technology is sure, it can get better, but it's still never going to be good enough for long distance, very large aircraft type situations. That it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I wonder if anybody ever calculated, the watt hour per kilogram coefficient to get like something like a 380 to fly from, for 12 hours in the air or something like that. But it would be astronomical. So I think we might as well wait for Star Trek and start wrapping bubbles and
Right.
time
Yeah.
space.
Well, just beam me
Yeah, beam
somewhere.
me directly, that's going to be less energy than actually having these kind of batteries. But and another topic that we also hear about is the ever promising hydrogen. It's been around for 56 decades now, and it's always around the corner. It's the world's most abundant molecule. Never mind that electrons make up a big part of those molecules, guys. Okay, and we keep on, in when it came to EVs, it was really difficult to make sense of it, especially the transportation of it and all. But with aviation, it's making a little bit more sense. What do you think is the place of hydrogen in advanced air mobility, if any at all?
Well, I think Joby has shown that it has opportunities. I mean, they already demonstrated that work. Um, there are, you can use it in a fuel cell. You can use it for combustion. So there's a lot of options available. I think the limiting factor is, again, it goes back to the infrastructures. Where is the hydrogen coming from? What form is it in? Is it refrigerated, or or is it just gas? How are you transporting? How are you storing it? How far can you realistically take it from where it's being produced to where you're using it? So there's some challenges there. And one thing that we've been playing around with in Washington State is looking at airports not only as transit hubs but also as energy hubs,
Thank you for saying that.
for a variety of reasons, right? So that, especially if you live in California, you got brownouts, you're having power outages. You can't deal with that at an airport. You gotta have reliable energy. And if you are your own energy island, then your microgrid, then you have control over that, or you can separate yourself from the grid if you need to. But the same thing goes for other types of
Yes.
energy. So we're looking at producing energy on airport, and maybe not even using the hydrogen in the aircraft, but for fueling of ground vehicles, not only at the airport, but for trucks. You've got cargo activity at airports, could be for delivery trucks. We have an airport that's got this plan where they're fueling hydrogen buses for the public transit in the local community, as well as looking at potentially being a fueling station for long haul trucks in terms of hydrogen. So, and airports just naturally lend themselves to, good transportation access, as well as, one thing people don't think about is, you may not want a hydrogen production facility in your backyard. Well, if you have it at an airport, it's kind of isolated away from things just by the nature of it. So there's a lot of good things we can do by, multitasking in terms of not only transit but also energy hubs, and combining all of that into a synergy.
I can't tell you how much what you've said is music to my ears, because for the last 2-3 years I've been telling airports to stop looking at themselves as a mobility hub, but also a potential energy hub, which then leads me into the other discussion we've been having with utilities. A lot of utilities tell us, "Oh, we'll give you enough electricity," and I'm like, well, Think about it this way, it's about 4 or 5,000 amps for one airplane, right? Imagine 6 o'clock, we got three of them, got 10 eVTOLs, got 50 drones, got a whole ground crew. Now we're looking at 30 to 50 megawatts. So you're telling me at 6 o'clock in the afternoon, you can provide that? And it's brilliant. Their faces decompose and are like, oh, that much. I'm like, yes, I'm not an expert at what you do, but I can tell you, and what we do, you guys are not, and the transmission is not there. So you said something that was very interesting. There are a lot of solutions. We can create hydrogen locally. Some airports have plenty of space. Some others, it might be a little difficult. I mean, yeah, JFK could feasibly push out into the water. LaGuardia, all these other places, that might be a little bit more difficult. San Francisco could. You guys up there, you have also a lot more space. But yeah, I hope you watch the podcast that will go before this one, where I was talking to two English gentlemen who figured out a very simple way of bringing hydrogen from one place to the other, and that's to actually turn it into ammonia. So after that, it's very easy to transport. It's pennies on the dollars. And then after that, just turning some of that ammonia into hydrogen and then burning it, which means no SOx, no NOx, or very little SOx actually, or probably shouldn't have any, right? But anyway, no carbon dioxide or anything like that. So all of these solutions are there, and it goes back again to airports. Our airports are at the middle of all this revolution right now, and a lot of solutions can happen for any one of them. And going back also, there's a lot of talk about how to use hydrogen inside of a fuel cell or to burn it directly. My understanding was more that hydrogen is more of an energy source than an energy storage. How do you look at all this?
Well, I hear it talked about both ways. So I guess it depends on what your goal is. I mean, you can use hydrogen as a storage system, like you mentioned, converting it into ammonia or putting it in the metal hydrates or again, transport or storage. So the it kind of just depends on what you're doing. I mean, you could have it as a storage, a type of energy storage, but then once it gets to the place where you're intending on using it, it then becomes an energy source where you could use it to fuel something, or you could use it to directly um, burn.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. Tell us a little bit about what you guys are doing up in Washington State. I mean, you guys have been very busy at the same time, but you haven't been nearly as vocal as a lot of other states. So I think it would be good for people to know what you guys are doing.
Well, we certainly are very interested in advanced air mobility because we have some unique geography. And in particular, we have the largest ferry system in the United States. We have a number of islands out in Puget Sound. Puget Sound itself is geographicically challenging because you have Seattle on the east side of Puget Sound, and then you have a huge peninsula of fairly dense population on the other side. Yet there's no way to go directly in between except by ferry, and in some cases not exactly where you want to go via ferry. So we have a unique opportunity to shorten the transit time across Puget Sound from hours to minutes, and then also connecting the various populated areas in Puget Sound with the San Juan Islands.
Hmm.
And right now, you can do a ferry, which again, it takes hours, or there's some limited seaplane flights that you can take. And some of those actually are being converted into electric aircraft as we speak as well. So yeah, there's a lot of opportunities there for passenger transit, but also the thing that we are looking into is cargo. It's a lot easier to get into the cargo space and also to make money off of cargo than it is people. So we're really interested in what we can do on the cargo side of things. And then the other use case is emergency response.
Yes.
So again, if you're on an island, you need to go to a hospital, there's not a lot of options other than air transit to get you someplace quickly. And so there's quite a bit of interest in emergency responders picking up some of these new aircraft in order to provide access to places that don't have that type of capability today.
Yeah, it's interesting what you're saying because it's true. Your neighbors further up north have been try to work with their de Havillands to turn them into electricity. I remember when they flew on pure electricity and the results were pretty good. Of course, it wasn't fully loaded or anything like that, but it's still pretty good. Those seaplanes really make a lot of sense for where you guys are, especially for hard to reach destinations or coastal along the islands. Yeah. And yeah, making money off of passenger, whether it's rail, anything is notoriously difficult. And that explains also why Amtrak is having such a hard time. It would be nice to, link up both sides of the country with a bunch of vertiports, and as we call them these days, multiports, because we want everybody to fly. We want helicopters, airplanes, eCTOLs, eSTOLs, eVTOLs. The more the merrier, and the more we can actually have a business case for all of them to merrily fly together.
Yeah, we kind of. Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say that we kind of view a vertiport that isn't easily accessible with other modes of transit as useless because
Mm.
the number of standalone vertiports that make sense are few and far between. Because you're going almost assuredly going to have to transfer to some other form of transit to either get to the vertiport or to get from the vertiport to wherever your final destination is. And interestingly, we our ferry system, we were talking to them about the prospects of advanced air mobility, and they said, yeah, we'd love that. And they kind of surprised us because they didn't want us necessarily supplementing what they do, but rather being the last mile transportation provider once you get to the island. So our ferry system is going electric. So we're going to have significant electrical charging infrastructure at our ferry terminals. And a natural add-on to that would be a vertiport where we can then transport folks to, in some cases, a fair distance from the terminal to final destinations on islands. So yeah, there's a lot of opportunities that you kind of almost have to think outside the box sometimes to get to.
Yeah, and actually, the more I think about it, but the more this is the ideal situation because when it comes to, when I look at the charging station infrastructure or what's being presented out there, 600 amps or even 700 amps is just not going to cut it in the long run, right? It'll be nice to charge overnight at something or another. However, yacht ferry charging systems, these guys are megawatts already. So they would easily handle charging. CCS2 is great. I'm looking at MCP kind of rates and beyond, obviously, but these guys are used to charging at much higher rates anyway. So it actually makes a lot of sense that the ferries and plus, the Scandinavian countries have shown us electric and hybrid ferries, and they work pretty well even in cold weather. So having that, you guys would have the infrastructure. So I'm going to be looking at it even more closely because I think, yeah, you guys are standing on something that's really interesting here.
Yeah, and another thing that we're excited about is like the unconventional options for, they're not even aircraft technically, but the sea glider
Yes.
is a what a great possible option for the Puget Sound area island connections, and the beauty is they're considered sea vessels, so they're certified by
Exactly.
the Coast Guard, not the FAA,
Yep.
and the operator is essentially a maritime professional, not an aircraft pilot. So it opens up a whole nother world of opportunities in terms of getting that operating maybe even before some of these eVTOLs or other aircraft are even certified. So yeah, I'd really like to see that become a reality for us because I think that that's going to provide more utility in terms of number of passengers you can carry, and lower hanging fruit than some of these other options that are getting so much attention.
Yeah, good point. And I think that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on the podcast today is to talk about the other possibilities, the other things that we may not talk about, because again, the shiny objects always attract the attention. Sea gliders are actually perfect for your sound because you don't have a lot of waves. And obviously, a lot of waves is a big no-no for sea gliders. But also another place I was thinking would be really ideal, and this is on the other side of the world, but in Indonesia, where they have a big problem bringing their seafood fresh to the capital to be shipped everywhere around the world. And they rely on heavy duty, slow diesel boats, which is really not ideal anyway. So these sea gliders would be amazing out there because there's not a lot of rough storms in between two of these islands. I mean, if they're close enough. So yeah, sea gliders, I'm very excited about it. To be honest, I really thought hovercrafts would somehow come back with the electrification, but when you look at a sea glider, the efficiency, the gliding right over waves like this is just, it's a no-brainer. So yeah, I hope I'm going to look even more and more into what you guys are doing. I think because I think you guys have definitely a really good platform there to look into these unconventional aircraft. No
Yeah,
S.
I think that I think they it can be, scaled too. I think they can get bigger before they become impractical. But yeah, I'm kind of with you. I remember riding on a hovercraft across the English
Yes.
Channel. I mean, man, that was the coolest thing at the
Yep.
time. And you look at them today, and you're like, oh my God, I can't believe they actually use those things. They were huge.
I think most people don't understand how big they were because I remember I was in college and we were going back and forth between schools and 4 buses would go in those things. I don't know how many cars would go in those things, and then we would go on the side of. They were huge. The amount of
Yeah.
power that it must have taken. I'd love to know what the power requirements were, but these things were monstrous. And I remember going over the waves when it was really wavy. The thing would kind of crab so that it wouldn't, feel that it was, and the vibrations, the noise. I mean, it was amazing. And of course, you're always scared. You're like, well, boy, if everything falls down, we're just floating on water, and that's about it. So yeah, sea gliders. I'm excited about that. We'll see where we're gonna go with this. So we're running towards the end, and of course, it's an open invitation. You're always welcome to come back. I always love your insights. One of the things that we do is we not only talk about the innovations, but we were talking about the people who actually work in our industries and why in the world are you doing this when you could just get a job somewhere else and call it a day. But so, David, what gets you out of bed in the morning? Why do you do the things you do?
Well, I'm really lucky that I have a leadership team that kind of lets me create my own agenda in terms of what to explore. Being I guess part of my career was as a researcher, college professor. That's still part of in my blood, and I enjoy looking to ways to solve problems. And one of the things that I deal with, I call it my day job, is land use issues for airports. So basically, making sure we don't build things we're not supposed to near airports. And getting into the AAM world, just saw a translation that needed to happen where, hey, we're going to have vertiports, we're going to have this drone activity. What does or does not make sense in terms of land uses that are safe or practical around those sites? Because we want to obviously be for these industries to be successful, and that one of the quickest ways to torpedo anything is to forget about public acceptance. And the best way to make sure you have good public acceptance is don't upset the people near where you're going to be operating. And if you listen to the manufacturers, public acceptance is kind of the last thing that they're thinking about. And I saw that as being concerning. And I would say even more so with the drone activity.
Yes.
Oh, but you're going to get your Amazon package faster. So of course you'll love it, but that may or may not be true. Plenty of YouTube videos about it already. So, it was just kind of a natural translation. So I want to see these industries be successful, and I get to do some research to kind of get that out of my system on a daily basis, and hopefully help the aviation industry move into the next iteration of what it's going to be.
Yeah, that's a really good point you make because I think I only know of not even a handful of companies that are actually basing their their business model on actual demand, where the demand is most needed, which of course takes into consideration beyond public acceptance, but public desirability. And for the vast majority, it's technology driven, which is great. And, we love to geek out on that part, but then there's the human factor that's also pretty important. And ultimately, that's where we're trying to do, help you in this whole great endeavor of ours. Well, David, I want to thank you for joining us today. Is there anything you would like our listeners to walk away with? There's just one little nugget you want to give out there?
Well, I do think that we are realistically on the precipice of some really exciting changes in the aviation industry, and whether that takes form in a new propulsion or new aircraft, or hey, looks like we might even be going supersonic again. So I think there's a lot of exciting stuff that's happening thanks to a lot of changes in technology that we've been seeing recently. So yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting next couple of years.
To say the least, to say the least. Well, you're always welcome to come back, and I'm always looking on LinkedIn to see what else is David discovering out there and letting us know about. So thank you again for joining us, and for you who are watching or listening, thanks for watching this, and also like, share, subscribe, and give us your thoughts. Has your understanding of advanced air mobility changed at all? Is there anything that you're still not clear about? Do you have that multi-billion-dollar idea? Hey, we'd love to hear from you guys. So share, subscribe, and then we'll see you very soon again next week. Thank you.
Thanks.